Hello, we're both muted. Good evening, everybody.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
I gave my best. No, cool. Wait a second.
Background?
No, all good. So, I want to talk about today about the new layout of StreamYard because it looks different than last time. We have those edges here. I don't know, never mind. So that's okay. So, topic for today is modern modern front-end development. Modern front-end development is very interesting because I think out of the disciplines out there, which we have, is front-end currently the most changing one. It always changes. It is like every year you have a different tendency. You have some, let's say, things which are quite constant, like the idea of React right now is very constant. But besides that, we have a lot of frameworks, a lot of ideas, a lot of how to actually deploy your stuff. So 3 to 5 years ago, people were deploying their front ends totally on Docker or on VPSs or something like that. And these days, you have a lot of magic clouds like Vercel, like those kind of things, where you magically do those things. And so the way how you build and how you deploy things have changed significantly. And they change significantly every year. And when you are a software developer, what you see then is the confidence is really challenged every year. When you have make a decision for something and you thought, hey, that was a good decision, let's take a look what happens in the next year, and suddenly everyone is telling you, oh, that's actually bad that you used that, even though we have told you, maybe last year that it was a good idea. This year we have this new trend. So the front end space is very trendy. And you quickly get into this, social proof bias and those kind of things. So that always impacts developers. And so you see all these posts about, oh, that is bad, that is great, you should use this. And then the others saying, oh, why you shouldn't use that. We had that today again, or I had that when I posted about TypeScript. And that TypeScript is now ported to Go, or they are about to do that. And there are so many people saying, hey, I keep my opinion for TypeScript for myself. And you have the very same with React, you have the very same with Angular, with Tailwind, with Next.js, with Vite, with Remix, with React Native. Now is Jinx? Was it Jinx? The new competitor for React Native and Flutter, this TikTok thing? I forgot. I can't remember how it's called. But, this is the next one. We have yet another way of creating a front end. So in a broader sense, a front end is not only a website, it can be an app as well, actually. So a web app or a native app, something like that. So it is ever changing. So if you take a look at the state of JS, how's it called again? Report, right? Survey, survey. You see that, you have those constants of whether people are using things, because once you use something, you can't simply switch, right? But the interest is always somewhere else. So I remember 2 years ago it was Svelte. I can't remember what was the interest last year. So the highest one, Svelte probably as well, one of them, but it is always changing. So for me as a primarily front-end development person, it is like you need to be very aware of the current technologies out there if you make the right decisions or not. And one of the biggest problems I ever faced was Next.js, because Next.js is actually a great framework to a point where you actually get into problems, and then it's suddenly a very non-agnostic vendor locked-in thing where you can't get out anymore as easily as you think, especially when you fall trapped to the ideas of how you should build things, which is actually very non-agnostic, as I said. And those kind of things, you need to understand them, and in order to understand them, you are forced to continuously learn about those. And that is quite interesting because most people struggle to do so, because it is a little bit like reading news. You only know what happens in the news, but you don't practice all of these things yourself in order to get real feedback. Does it make sense what I say? It was a question, actually.
Are you asking me or are you asking our audience?
It's asking you, of course.
I don't know. I guess we have very different experiences when it comes to front-end. I think it's just the differences in our industries. Like for me, it's been a long time since I worked with a team that segregated themselves, consciously siloing out the front-end part of the team to a front-end team. It's been a very long while since I was in that kind of organization. So I reason about it under this notion of it's just software engineering. There's nothing special about front-end. But there is a lot of, let's say, risks with certain front-end frameworks. Because, well, it's an embedded system, essentially, right? So when you compile your code, the binary that you produce, if I can call it binary, it runs on a different runtime than what you built it on. So the runtime is embedded in your user's computer, and you can't control it, right? It used to be the case that you could. That modern front end was basically you saying install Flash, install Silverlight, and you could install the user's front. You could control the user's front end, and then it said, here's a basic web page. If you want full functionality, you need to install this and install this and install this. And you didn't treat it like an embedded system where the user's stack was incompatible. You told them, hey, welcome to our web page. Please install Firefox or F off, right? Back in the days of IE5 or IE6. Nowadays, as standards get better, you sort of get used to integrating with whatever the user has embedded in their device. But it also comes with the trade-off that the possible things that you're interacting with as a developer that the user has embedded, their browser, their engine, how much memory they have, the shape of their viewport, those are things that are essentially commoditized problems that are generic problems that have commoditized solutions. And it's kind of wasteful. Like, you are wasting your time needlessly if you're reinventing that. Like, those are all solved problems. So the front-end world in itself, I would say, isn't special in the regard that it's different from backend in the sense that you probably want to use some libraries to make your life a little bit easier. But it's like the integration points with front-end require you to rely on a lot of commoditized solutions that are non-standard. So to us, state update, stateful frontends are a solved problem because they have been commoditized by tools like React. But it's not standard. Like the browser does not natively include React.
Mm-hmm.
So you use frameworks, libraries, and then there's disagreements of like which flavor of React you should be using or which flavor of reactivity, right? So we saw the rise of Vue.js and the decline of Vue.js, and then Next and Nuxt came along, and then not Next, Nest,
Yes,
Nest and
yeah.
Nuxt came
But
along and then declined.
Nest is for backend.
Yes, but it's for backend, but it comes with this idea of we want to give you a full stack um, full stack experience because we kind of assume that you're using TypeScript on the front end. So it's
I love that
so
idea.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
it is solving this notion that there are commoditized solutions
Mm-hmm.
that are non-standard, and it's very likely that you will have certain problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that this seep into user land more and more, right? So we have commoditized solutions for authentication. We have commoditized solutions for geo-tracking. We have commoditized solutions for the goddamn cookie banners for EU users. We have commoditized solutions for state management with things like React, Redux, Zustand. We have commoditized solutions for rolling out software, for edge
Mm-hmm.
functions, for state change, for managing effects, side effects in what seems to be functional or at least to some degree declarative functional core front-end styles. And there's a lot of commoditized solutions for bridging the gap between CSS, JavaScript, and HTML. Things like Tailwind or styled components that is a bit more passé. It didn't take on as much as Tailwind, for example. But they're all non-standard, right? So there is, as much as there was progress, there is still a huge resistance to standardization. And that's just the lay of the land, I would say. That just comes with the territory. So you don't need to learn all of these things, but there's an opportunity cost to you not leveraging, not knowing the commoditized tools that are bringing basically solved problems to your table.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be my and these things are hard. Like using the tools is hard as well. Like learning how to use React is not easy. Learning how to like create a component that manages a multi-step form workflow that has a file upload in it is not trivial. With any tool that you're using.
I think that's one of the issues with modern front-end development is that React is treated as a beginner thing. So you start your career with learning the basics, which is React, which doesn't make sense to me because when I take a look at what React actually is, it is more a advanced pattern. And that's definitely a problem when you take a look at the current state of younger developers who learned the idea of full stack in React and basically suffer in small startups because they have set up React in a bad way. And you do that. So we did that as well. So the first project with React we totally failed, and the second was okay, and then it was basically substituted by two other versions we built, which were then good. It took ages until we understood, but when we understood, we actually understood why it was so great and where the benefits were. And that is one of the interesting parts. So modern front-end development, in my opinion, is a very complex thing. It's a very complex thing to understand. You mentioned the embedded idea. So I still had that this week. Wait a second, something is wrong with my camera. What's going on with my camera? I have
Network issues.
No, that's not a network issue. That's
CPU.
no, it's not CPU. That's this Logitech nonsense. I should have used another camera. Should be good. A second. No, it's not. Oh my god. Sorry.
It's okay.
It's annoying.
Take a moment. Take a minute and sort it out.
I shouldn't use this camera anymore, to be honest. I have another one, but I haven't set it up. Damn
Is
it.
it working now?
No, it's not. Okay, I restarted the camera. Now it's working.
Good. Come back.
Good. So you said embedded. So we have things like the browser problems. And what I had, this simple thing is, there was a list of items that was basically, imagine WhatsApp, you have your conversations, you scroll through them, and they update. On some point in time, you have an update, which is then something like, hey, you have a new message there, this is the latest message, and you see the first part of the new message. So this message, this conversation will be put up in the top of the list. In Safari, in Firefox, and on iOS, simulators works fine. In Chrome, is every second time I have that happens, basically the scroll is reset to the first position, which is pretty annoying when you have multiple conversations and you are in the middle of the scroll actually, right? And then you basically scroll up every time something updates. And it took us a while to find a solution for that. We needed to be a little bit work around that. That doesn't happen very often. Actually, it's often vice versa, that you don't have that in Chromium, but in the others. But that time it was vice versa. And this was very normal 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to all day long work like that. But this still happens. And that is what you said. You build something and you don't know exactly how it works out. Then on iOS, you have transparency problems. Where we don't have them in Chrome, and you have Z-index problems where you don't have them in other browsers. And that is something in Frontend you need to consider. Does this have anything to do with React? All these issues I just mentioned haven't basically something to do with React. But what I love about React, probably this, the sibling things like Vue or Svelte as well, which are following the same idea of the reactiveness of the basically describe things and have a state. The UI functions equals function state, is that you can focus on actually building a app correctly. As a prerequisite for that, you need to understand those things. And I think the biggest issue with understanding the modern frameworks is their complexity. It's not only, let's say, React isn't a framework, it's a library, but if you take a look now into the scene of frameworks, like we have Next.js, we have Vite, we have Remix, probably some others, which you can use to actually fire up your React application. The problem is, so React developed from a client-side rendered framework, so which was made to create SPAs actually, to something very complex. We had that with Nick in the session where we were taking a look into React server components, where you suddenly have this very big thing from top to down, top to bottom, where you have a server side, where you have a thing in between, the middleware, where you have a client side thing, and all these things behave differently. And that's one of the caveats. What most people don't really understand when they start with their front-end stuff is that they actually bound themselves to a framework when they start to use it. Many people say, hey, Next.js is great. Everyone's talking about that, must be great. I'm fine. If you don't understand that, don't just fall a trap to these kind of frameworks. Make sure you understand when you use server-side components, image optimization, when you use React components, those kind of things are great things. And even the React team is encouraging people to use those server-side things, which are mostly available only in Next 15 right now. You can do that. But then you need to live with that. Removing, or let's say moving away from a highly integrated Next.js application, fully server-side rendered with some client-side stuff, is extremely difficult. Not only technically, but economically. right? So if you have built, let's say, 40 to 50,000 lines of code, which isn't that big, is already a it is such a painful, bumpy road to get away from that. And if you want to move over to some other platform which does have, let's say, different implementations of how SSIS are working or something like that, you're actually quite screwed. You can do that. But as a company, that is no value whatsoever. Because what you actually do is you refactor for the sake of refactoring because you have made, actually, you don't refactor. You change things because you haven't let's say, you weren't able to foresee problems. And that is why I think that people should stay in in a modern front end world with more boring things like client-side rendering, because client-side rendering is agnostic. Many people don't realize that you can use the very same client-sided front-end component. If you set it up right with a good ports and adapter pattern, you can actually use that in Vite, you can use that in Next, you can use that in Remix, you can even use it in CRA if you like. So you can even, use React yourself without a builder. It could use it still, as long as you don't have, let's
I
say,
wouldn't recommend it.
what do you mean?
I mean, I would at the bare minimum in 2025, I would say, like, if you're doing JavaScript frontends, then at least use, TypeScript and Vite. Like, that would be the bare minimum.
Yeah.
There are so many issues with package resolution. If you're building a single file, a single JavaScript, TypeScript file, and you're building it and shipping it to the browser, sure, no problem. But the moment you start importing modules, and some of your imports are from installed node modules, you need a builder. Because that is a non-trivial problem to translate over, right? So the browser is an embedded system that does not match the system under which you have built the code. Right? So I install, if I need, I don't know, underscore.js for my code, if I install it with Node and I have I don't know, I have a React project with Vite, I'm installing it into Node modules. But now I need to understand how it bundles. So how much of Node modules get bundled into what I send to the browser? Is it going to be one file? Is it going to be a separate file for everything? What kind of tree shaking is being done? Like, these are non-trivial problems. And the earliest tools that started off simple, that sort of gave you out of the box the minimal, the MVP for what you would need for such a thing is Webpack. And it's terrible to use.
Yeah.
And it is extremely verbose to configure. Right? So, and the JavaScript ecosystem is littered with tools like this that are kind of simple. It's like, don't overcomplicate it. Just use a simple tool. And then that simple tool becomes a nightmare to configure. Things like Gulp, things like Webpack, things like Bower, things like Gulp, Grunt, Webpack, I mentioned already. And a few, Selenium. It's possible that you'll have to create 200, 300, 400 lines of code just to configure them. And that's madness, right? So that's why these modern ecosystems exist. That's why TypeScript exists. That's why Vite exists. That's why Vitest exists. That's why, to some degree, that's why Next.js exists, because it solved those problems at another meta level of, we can tree shake node modules, but how are we tree shaking your components? Right? So there's one build mode that optimizes for small size for the end user, but you probably, as a developer, want a build mode that optimizes for latency for refreshing in your browser, because you're probably looking at it while you're developing. So you need hot module reloads or module swapping as you're coding, and that's a non-trivial problem. That's why these build tools exist. So yes, you can build it with plain JavaScript without any tools, but in 2025, I wouldn't recommend it. Like, I wouldn't recommend you start any JavaScript project without TypeScript or Vite. I think that would be shooting yourself in the foot. Like, you're sort of going down. You have to do some learning, but not now. Let's learn something else first. And then once you learn JavaScript without any build tools and you become good at that, then you can throw it all away to relearn it again. Like, no, just do the work and learn it. And to your comment earlier that you don't understand why React is popular,
Yep.
React is popular because it is used in educational content, right? So educational content in the front end world will always gravitate, I think, at least historically, it has always gravitated towards the the library or framework that provides the most amount of reactivity for the least amount of code written. jQuery, Flash. Um, in between, there was that moment of Angular 1.
I
It could
don't
provide a
remember.
lot of, because it could provide a lot of um, interactivity with mouse over tooltips, with live page reloads. Same thing with the SPA movement, and then React came in, and then everything else, right? So it gives you the most amount of interactivity for the least amount of code written, for the least amount of bundling code written and glue code written if you have to do the bundling manually as well. That's why it's so popular, because it is predominantly, I can write a book and the code example can be minimal if I use React, or very extensive if I use something else. And that's no coincidence. Like the cognitive load needed to just learn these concepts is enormous. So if there's a framework that makes it easier, things like Svelte or React are very good at it. And I think Svelte is much better than React. Svelte minimizes it
In
even
terms
more.
of learning,
In terms of interactivity per line of code written, I think Svelte is a more denser syntax, but you need to learn special magical syntax. It's not just JSX. So Svelte on that front, I think, is doing a much better job, which I believe is why it's so popular. And it's a good thing, ultimately. But you will end up just deferring the learning experience of, well, you kind of still need to know what happened under the hood.
you need to, especially in React, for example. In React, you have those great tools like React DevTools. You have this new, I forgot it. React Analyzer. I think it was an analyzer where you basically can really take a deep dive into how your application is actually rendering, how you set up states, how you set up hooks, how you build actually your components. I think so. We have two applications round about, let's say, 90,000 codes of 90,000 line of codes each with React and Next.js. Even though we don't use server-side, it is just because of history that we still use Next.js, and we are still not sure if we keep it or basically trade it against Vite. But I think the biggest issue or biggest learning was how to actually structure your project. The structuring of your project and how you actually think about a component will decide how well it performs, how well it is readable, understandable, and intertwined, aka connaissance, with other components, and how much interference and side effects you have, or let's say side effects you don't want to have, and those kind of things are actually mattering a lot. And that is one of the reasons why I personally haven't used React Server Components yet. I haven't used SSR on a large scale because, in my opinion, SSR is only good for one thing, and that is SEO. I don't use it for anything else because I don't see any benefit there. So you have the feeling that, oh great, I have a server-side thing, so I can offload. But the problem is you don't need to offload off the clients anymore because why? We are in 2025. You don't need to do that anymore. So the devices where the things are running on, they're totally fine to actually operate a wonderfully optimized CSR version with a good API, which is well connected. So then it doesn't really make a difference, especially when you understand suspense and tree shaking, those kind of things. Those are the deeper concepts then, and how you actually structure things, how to use caching effectively. Most people don't understand caching at all. You have in a real application, you have server-side caching, you have, backend caching, not the next server-side thing. You have next caching as well, of course. You have caching on the network layer, like with the, things like the like Cloudflare or something like that can cache for you as well. You have caches in form of Redis. You have caches in the browser in form of the standard cookie cache. You have the IndexedDB cache, the local storage, all those kind of things. You have a 10-stack query can have a persistent client provider, which is basically intertwined with IndexedDB to actually save a lot of drama for your clients. So once you get a lot of data, right? Because most applications, the real applications are heavy usage applications where you get a lot of data from the system, and it does make sense to cache those, data chunks as long as possible on the client. Because every time you need to pull those large amount of things, that's actually one of those hassle things. And an SSR or even ISR, so incremental stuff, is very much the opposite of what you want to have. The idea of, hey, I can actually pre-generate content, or let's say pre-generated content would be static site generation, but I can be personalized for that user, and you have 1,000 users at the same time. You need to think about the load you create on the server side for client-side modifications. So you want to change something on the client side, therefore you process that on the server side. Doesn't make sense for me, because you have the client side. Just do it there, because we aren't in React 10 anymore or something like that, where this was a problem because that was like, oh, this huge chunk which is going to the browser. You have those slow devices, bad Wi-Fi, bad i3 computers everywhere. That isn't the case anymore, right? So we need to take this into the consideration as well, and understand why CSR is actually client-side rendering. Let's spell it out correctly. Is actually, in my opinion, one of the best things you can have. Not only because of what I just said, but that before as well. You are agnostic, so you can use it in Vite in the same way as you use it in Next.js or Remix. It is only when you go into the server side, when you actually run into the real problems with your framework. This is where your framework wants to have you. For example, Next.js. So we are Next.js users. Actually, we are heavy Next.js users, but we avoid server-side stuff as good as possible, sometimes image optimization. But what we definitely don't do, and we will not do, is Vercel. Because Vercel, in my opinion, is a trap. So they sell you an idea of, hey, you can have edge functions, you can, those functions will be, magically enhanced for you into some way. The problem is, when you are unhappy with that, you have no possibility to change things. That might be interesting for a startup who is totally uninterested into doing anything themselves. But in my opinion, we need to be very careful here, because most people should be aware of what they need in the future. So do I really need Vercel? And is it okay for me to stay with that provider for the next years to come? We couldn't, just because of politics, right? So it wouldn't be a provider which would be accepted by the clients we have. If we would have built it upon that, we would have migrated already away. So agnosticism is, for many people who work in B2B with larger enterprises, an absolute must. It might be not for the startup who's just generating an idea. Maybe it's working, but there are other solutions as well. Tomorrow we will have a stream about that, how to deploy to DigitalOcean into a Docker container. You can do that as well. It's totally fine. And once you reach the point where this might be to not suiting your needs anymore, well, that's that far away, right? Yeah, that's my 2 cents on why I would prefer React only with client-side rendering to start with, and only if you have a very good reason go into SSR. But every time you go into that decision-making process, try to find reasons to be against SSR. So because the complexity, you don't want to have that. There's so less benefit other than having a SEO optimized thing, right? Even though I think in the next years SEO will change anyway, because AI is there. You don't really need to have everything predefined, because AI wants to take a look at the rendered version and not at the just.
I don't want to speculate at that just yet. I think the pages still need to be indexed. The indexing will always.
No, it's still possible. You don't need to have. So is SPA, which is totally client-side rendered, can be indexed as well already. That was passed, so it's no speculation. I was just speculating that this trend will even become more prominent because they don't only want to have the idea of what is the headline 1, 2, 3 in paragraphs. They want to know what actually happens on the page, quality and those kind of things. And that is what AI can do. It's no problem. Would be obvious.
You mentioned you're showcasing how to deploy a front-end application to DigitalOcean. Can you run us through your toolchain for that? That you'll use tomorrow?
Basically, you start with your project, and we tend to have mono repositories in a very simple form. So people ask me, hey, do you use NX or something like that? No, we actually don't use that because especially for front-end, you only have one front-end. Sometimes you have two, but I wouldn't start to share things between those things. That's simply my opinion. That really doesn't save you anything long term. It is nice on the first day. It is horrible on the days after that. And so a mono repository, which is just a folder with several subfolders, and every subfolder is an application. And there have some files there, some Docker files, some READMEs, those kind of things. And then you actually push that to Git or GitHub in our case, it's GitHub. And we basically then push it there, and we connect it to DigitalOcean in that case. This is what I showed tomorrow. So we connect that, and then you actually say, I want to deploy that. And then you need to define components. You can do that by UI, you can do that by YAML files, as you wish. So we do it by YAML because we want to have the YAML files inside the mono repository as well, to have it as a very simple form of infrastructure as code. A declaration version of it, so it's not a coded version like Terraform is. You could use Terraform as well, but it's totally over the top. You don't need Terraform. It's
unnecessary. Yeah, it's too verbose for what you get out of DigitalOcean.
For standard web apps, no. Just stick with YAML, or even if you just use UI, it is okay, right? So you can start with UI, especially if you don't know ops too good and you don't know what the terms mean. Maybe the UI is the better way. You get more information, so you get a visible feedback. What you actually do then is you connect this GitHub to your DigitalOcean account. Then you say create a new platform. You say which components, which domains, if you want to connect storage, if you want to connect databases, if you want to connect Redis, those kind of things. And then you basically have the possibility to set up your secrets, your environments on an app level and so app level is the platform level, and the actual component levels. You can set up your logging. You can have your metrics. They're already built in. But the login, for example, we use Datadog. You have a Datadog integration, can Papertrail as well, those kind of things. And then you basically deploy it. What happens then is a pipeline is running, which is basically a how's it called again? That's the cloud native. I forgot how they're called. This is those packages where you actually have the typical build, test, deploy pattern, right? Where you have where for Node applications actually, and where you basically have a pre-built thing where you can basically change those things, but what you do there is build, test, deploy, and then you have it deployed. What you can do then is you can roll back. You can actually, which is a good feature if you have messed something up and you need to quickly roll something back. You don't need to mess with Docker repositories in this case, but everything you deploy is basically deployed in Docker containers, which is, in my opinion, still a very good thing to do because you can set the scaling, you have a lot of control over your application, you can set all the things you need to have for, let's say, more advanced pen testing things. That is actually quite interesting, quite important to have in control still. So it's not the magic cloud. It is just a highly integrated platform which takes away or abstracts the complexity of Kubernetes and a pipeline. What you can do, what we have in older versions of what we do where we use the DigitalOcean App platform is that we use GitHub Actions instead of the integrated pipeline. That's possible as well. So you can basically have your own pipeline and deploy it to the Docker registry inside DigitalOcean, or even if you have another one somewhere, like the Docker Hub version, for example, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And then you basically tell the platform to deploy this pattern of containers. So you could even say, keep this, the front end on that version and only deploy the backend. But what we do is we tend to deploy always like the trunk is right now. So if the trunk is that kind of version, then all components are of the same version, so there is no subversioning what we do there, which is very important on the long run when you understand what I mean by that. And that is how we actually do that. And everything else below that is treated by the platform so that it is actually running, and we can focus on if it's running efficiently, if it's running good, if the monitoring tells us that the uptime is good, the latency is good, those kind of things is all built in. And that is when you do that, when you need to do that yourself or have done that yourself with things like Grafana, Prometheus, manual Datadog sidecar containers in Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, those kind of things are pretty nasty to do. Especially when you just have a web app, and it's oftentimes not very viable. And that is what I really like about that, because that is so much more easy than taking a AWS ECS thing, because ECS sounds as simple as that, but you need to assemble many things to get to the point where I just mentioned. And the nice thing is, even you can even give access, like junior developers, to this platform, like read-only writes, so they can take a look into the build pipeline, they can take a look into the configuration, and start to take ownership of the process in building their applications. So you can basically run your Next.js React app or your Vite.js app, or even both at the same time, next to each other in the same platform. You have then your backend. Either it is your Next.js backend if you really want to have it, or you have an SJS or something with Go or something else. You want to just run in a Docker environment and have it run under the same domain, which is quite nice because of CORS. So you don't have this typical pattern where the backend is under another domain. So you already have that in the same domain. And this is so convenient to actually focus on what is really important when you develop your big front end, is to do the front end stuff instead of taking a look at how you actually deploy that. So there are other platforms as well, like Northflank, and actually I don't know so many who offering that one as a fixed service. But DigitalOcean is was one of the first who actually was offering that. And when you have just a static web app, like an SPA, a React SPA, Svelte SPA, something like that, you can even push that without Docker. They basically handle that for you, which is quite interesting as well. Yeah, that's now in a nutshell, in a large nutshell, how it's working.
Do you ever do a compute node for handling your React bundles? Like, do you ever rebundle them dynamically depending on what kind of user it is? You know, rebuilding the bundle on the fly. For example, if a Japanese user come on, you package a bundle quickly with Japanese translations, and you strip away the English translations for a bundle.
No.
Is that something you ever do for
No.
like backend for front-end sort of middleware with your static service?
No, we don't do that. So for translation, we do it in an active way. So since in the current solution we don't use SEO, so maybe it changes in the future when we do something with that. But as long as we don't use that, we basically do that on compile time, where we translate things on compile time.
On build time, the build
No,
part of compile.
So build time is, for me, the time which happens in the pipeline. For you as well?
Yeah.
No, there's nothing like that. We have that during runtime. In older applications, we have the typical large CSV files where we have all the translations inside there. There we start to always make it like smaller chunks of files prepared for the right language. Those kind of things we still run in very old legacy systems. But in newer systems, it is made via let's say very cached GraphQL calls, let's say, and that makes more sense. because you want to be dynamic. Because one of the ideas of modern applications is that you want to change something about that. So if you want to change something in the translations, you should be able to do that as a user of the platform. So it cannot be just bundled inside. It must be something active, which can be queried and mutated at the same time. So just to use the terminology here of things like GraphQL and 10-stack query, right?
What about native apps that are built using web technologies?
I love that. That's one of my pet peeves. I mean, like, wait a second. I mean, what about is now the question? Wait a second.
So I'm thinking about things like React Native, PWAs, Electron, for example, where the web technologies that come embedded and bundled with browsers are more, let's say, tooling rich and more available than the equivalent native tooling for the platform itself. And there are, let's say, it's a non-trivial choice, but it is a very popular choice to build native apps using web technologies, just to build them once on a common platform and then iron out the kinks for the particular platform, rather than building them natively for each platform selectively.
Yeah, that was a switch some years ago, which we saw. And we had last year a big year for PWAs because there was a big win on the EU level against iOS, where iOS needed to allow those things. And why is it now important? So there are some points I want to actually respond with. So first of all, when you build a progressive web app, right, which does have a set of specific attributes to it, and one is to be offline first or offline ready. So which means that a real PWA is actually runnable just only on the client. So as soon as it's downloaded, there should be an app, even though you can't pull
An
or
example
fetch data.
for our viewers would be Gmail. Gmail is a offline ready PWA.
Yeah, I even think StreamYard, which we're using right now, is as well.
Yes.
Canva is partly, so it is does have everything which a PWA has except the offline capabilities. It does have some offline caching, but it's not 100% offline thingy. And so what is important? So imagine you have now a Next application, which is primarily used for server-side rendering these days. As soon as you have server-side rendered components, you can still build a PWA, but you can't push the PWA into an app store and make a TWA out of that, a trusted web application, which is how is it called in the Play Store, in the Google context. And in iOS, you need to still wrap it inside a wrapper. And especially the iOS people, so the Apple people, don't like server-side components. So they want to be able to scan the entire application before they say it's trusted. And if you have a lot of server-side things and you just change the server-side components while you actually review it, they don't really like that. And they basically don't allow that, as far as I know. So I've never tried it again since back then. And so you should stay with client-side first, or client-side only at least, which is actually quite possible. So you should be able, or should be, build a client. That's what you should do, if that asks the answers the question. And yes, for the viability, these days, so you can use React Native and you can use React. In my opinion, and that's one of the interesting parts, I have a big article ready, which is not yet released about that. Will be released this week. It is about if we actually use or need still any Flutter, something like that. Do we still need that, even though Flutter can create a web version as well? It's crappy actually, or React Native. Do we really need that? No, because most of the applications we have, I think 80 to even 90% of the applications we would build are well buildable with web technologies these days. No problem whatsoever. And what the others are standing for is performance. So what type of performance? I'm talking about compute heavy performance, not standard performance for just an app. If you build just an app where you have a button where you scroll, you have items, you click on that, you go to the next scene, you click on something there, there's an image, something like that. You don't need that type of native performance to display that. The browser view is totally fine on all different devices today. So there's no problem.
I'll be
Okay. Yeah, let's quickly go ahead with that one. Microphone is good. Okay, let me quickly take a look if I can sneak peek into this article, because that is actually quite interesting. There it is. I can actually... No.
I'm back.
Okay. I would quickly show, because modern frontend is actually quite interesting in that case. I would put it into here and I would show it real quick, and then I can answer that better. Page isn't working. Reload. Too many redirects. I'm still here?
What's going on?
My browser tells me too many redirects. Maybe because, yeah, now I understand. Maybe secret draft link. It's so secret. I know what I did. Okay, now I can show it. Ta-da! Okay. So what I want to show is, so that the article is exactly about that one. So these kind of applications, so business productivity, SaaS platforms, communication, e-commerce, media and entertainment, finance, tech, healthcare, education, all these kind of things, you can build them with web technologies and push them to Electron, to app stores, and let it run. Teams, all those kind of tools we have right now are that already, right? So maybe they aren't in the specification of a PWA, but it's very, very close. It's like a sibling, right? It is very, very close to that. And then we have that one. This is an interesting one as well. It's where's the PWA actually? So we have the traditional website on the horizontal, which is the discoverability and the cost effectiveness, and we have the vertical, which is features and performance. This is where we say, okay, we have actually native apps. Yes, in a native app we have way more features, which is actually tied to the actual device, which you don't really have in a PWA, but you can have it by having something like capacitor, where you use, so in the PWA you of course doesn't have that because it probably runs in a browser, but if you let the PWA run into a wrapper inside a native app, you still have those features, and you can build 80-90% of your app just with web technologies for cross-platform, and just update this one specific thing you might need for your Maps app, if you need that anyway, because yeah. And there is where the performance is. So yeah, those Flutter, React Native, and native apps, of course, are more performant, but you don't have the advantages like the traditional website with the discoverability. So you can just have an PWA, a total complete app, by just scanning a QR code on some wall in some park or something like that, and you instantly have an app open, which is installed and offline ready. While the other thing you need to install, you need to wait until it's installed, and then you need to open it, and you can't even log in because your password manager is not really working. Those kind of nasty things, which is all covered by the PWA. So I actually would really recommend to take a look into PWAs if you don't have done that already. And there are so many technologies like Vite PWA, Svelte does have things. There is Next PWA, those kind of things. It is quite easy to build one these days. You can even build it vanilla if you are one of these guys. You can do that. But maybe I wouldn't do that. I will release that. There are some more informations about that as well. I have made a total comparison between PWA, Flutter, React Native, and all the aspects, when it's good, when it's not good. And in my opinion, it's actually the winner is
So
the PWA.
for those wondering, we already covered this to some degree when the EU regulation came into effect that challenged Apple last year. You can find this on our YouTube archive for our tech journey.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you like to wrap in 5 minutes? Would you like to open up another point of discussion?
I
Or
think
would you like to go with you?
I think we should maybe yeah, we can take a look. Wait a second. So let's wrap up. So because you have a limited amount of time today, and then we take a look what happens afterwards. So
Okay.
modern web technologies. First of all, what we have covered is they aren't easy. It is not like, hey, we start with a front end and on some day we can become a competent backend developer. It's not like that. You either go for that one or that one, you maybe change, but both are equally complex in their specific domains. When you start with a framework, and you should start with a framework, as we mentioned, pick the right one. Even if it's a framework, like a meta framework or a builder, you need to have something which takes away and abstracts away the complexity of the Node, Deno, or Bun world, which is extremely complex if you try to do it yourself. If you try to do it yourself and you think it's worth your time, you'll probably not have a business model yet. It's just for fun. So if you want to focus on your business, make sure you can focus on your business. So use one of them. So is it React, which you should use? There are good alternatives to React out there. React is the most used one, so you're very safe with React. You are not so safe with Next.js. That's one of the caveats. So React is great. Next.js, maybe not, because it's basically a biased and opinionated framework, while Vite is a more open one. So decide between which type of frameworks you actually want to be. The same actually happens in Svelte or in Vue, but especially in React, you have a pretty broad collection of things you can use. So it's not so hard. So it's actually quite easy to lose yourself in the React ecosystem, and it's not so hard to lose yourself in the Vue ecosystem. So it's more streamlined, like as the React app ecosystem would be streamlined. So that is the second point. Then we have made the point is what you can actually do or build with. We have talked about CSR, SSR, and what you should use. And I have responded that I'm 100% sure that you should start with CSR, so client-side rendering only, until you have the point where you have a hard need to actually go for SSR or for React Server components. Especially React Server components are a great idea on a theoretical side, but think twice if you want to implement them into production today, because they are so new. Don't do it right now for a long-term project. Don't do it. Use boring tech. Boring tech is React. React is already boring tech with client-side rendering. So if you are insecure and you definitely don't build an SEO-optimized website, you build an app, a typical app, I would have the tendency to say, take a look for Vite with React, 10-stack query. It may be Tailwind. This is my personal choice because fuck CSS. Don't do that. Yeah. Okay. Next point, last point was PWA. Why PWA? Because what we often forget is most people talk about Next.js these days when it comes to frontend. Maybe Vite, but Next.js is the typical thing. And there was big trend about that. But Next.js is solely about optimization, SEO optimization, server-side rendering. That's the big idea of Next.js. That is, Next.js ecosystem was meant with SSR to basically destroy WordPress. That was the original idea of that. To find something where you have more control and better control of a more future trendy environment like the PHP version of WordPress is. If you still build web apps, and those are the actual complex apps, this is where the big money is, right? This is where most developers actually work in large companies. There you should avoid Next.js as long as possible, because you don't have the need there, except for the website for the company maybe. But for most other cases, there are exceptions of course, but most other cases, you should Think like an application developer and not a website builder. That's important. That's totally different. So when you build a website, you build something pretty static, a little bit of personalized data, and a lot of users watching and consuming this, and that's it. But an application is very interactive. It is very, let's say, very compute intensive. A lot of data, a lot of backend things going on. This is the reason why you need a proper backend there. That's then the point where you should take a look into how do I actually build my apps? And if you don't understand the progressive web app pattern with the offline capability, the resilience and the reliability aspects, so that you actually, when you have a bad Wi-Fi and you click on reload, then you still have the page with all the skeletons, everything is running fine, and you can still operate with the app. That is a standard today. You shouldn't avoid this by just having something which is only running on the server side. So take that into consideration as well. So PWAs, or at least the idea of that, should be for you if you build web apps or native apps or hybrid apps, right? So take that into consideration as well. Hashtag service workers. Yeah. So I think that was a wrap up from my side. What do you think?
I think we should mention like what makes Next.js different from a static Vite project that has React components.
You can use them very, very similar. So if
what's the main difference? Like when would you say, oh, I need Next.js now?
You need Next.js when you want to go into something with server-side rendering, incremental site generation, or React Server components. Because React Server components will be usable in Vite as well, but as far as I know, Next.js are the only supporters right now which have that implemented in a way which you might not use yet, but it is available there. So Next.js is good when you have those things. When you want to optimize your output on the server already, and when you need that. But if you're only staying with a typical SBA, with a typical local application, the embedded application, right? Then Vite is actually the better choice. So Vite is the universal thing. You will never have a real problem with client-side rendered only if you are not in the SEO environment. So maybe there are some exceptions, but in my opinion, I would always prefer. So when someone says, I don't know and I don't build a website, then go with Vite. Even though you can do the same with Next.js, you can just leave away the middleware stuff and server stuff and just have an exported SBA out of Next.js. But it is truly and clearly not made for this. Because in the documentation, they say you can do this, but you shouldn't.
Yeah. What I see often is people reusing I want to clear something up. I don't know if this is confusing to our viewers, but I personally found this confusing for a very long time when Next.js came out. Next.js is a backend framework. It is a framework that runs on the backend. It's a node project, right? So Next.js runs on a server on Node.js, typically what you would consider to be your backend stack. Now, what it produces is the front-end output. But it doesn't need to have a server. It doesn't need to have what you would consider an API. It can just provide static JavaScript from its node-hosted public static resources, or even just a static server with a strong CDN capable server without Node even running. You would only use Node as a convenience tool to reuse the same Docker container to build the static stuff, and then host it into the CDN locally, so that you don't have to have like a separate build step, and that if one of them crashes or if you run out of disk space, it can still rebuild it very quickly and serve it for you, rather than you having to reorchestrate the entire container. But what I see a lot of people do is reuse that build tool, Next.js, which is capable of hosting a server, for server-side rendering, and they're reusing that node server to tack onto it an Express server to then use it as a backend server.
Don't do that.
What's your opinion of that? That to me, at least, as a non-native Next.js user, that seems very popular and very weird.
It is a little bit like what we have done to ourselves in the past with PHP, to have your CSS, HTML, database logic, and compute logic on the same file, right? And just run it like that. So it is not exactly like that anymore, right? So the idea that you can have database calls on the server side in APIs, in server-side components, in middlewares, where you connect to a server.
Just to be clear, that is
Yeah.
okay. Next.js does support that when it is used for server-side rendering of a component that is served
Yes, exactly.
through the wire, through its
So as soon as
but not as a Express.js Node API, REST API.
exactly,
Or
not as a
GraphQL
proper
server.
backend. It is
Or-
not a proper backend. As long as you use to optimize your code to make, let's say, instead of having, let's say, a chat with 5,000 conversations and 10,000 messages, you can already, you can fetch these data parts better server, and basically have that then in an optimized way pushed to your client might be a good solution in that case. But don't be the actual part which is connecting to the Redis, making sure that everything is running, updating the caches of some workers or something like that. Don't do that. This is backend. This is proper backend work. That needs to be done in a different way. In an own domain, in an own environment. You can run it in the same Docker environment, or let's say Kubernetes or something like that, under the same idea of platform. That's possible. We do that as well, but it is not the same thing as the Next.js thing. So we, for example, use Next.js as the backend solution, and please don't use Next.js as a substitute for Nest.js, or Go or Rust or whatever.
Next.js. So help me out here, because Next.js did at some point recommend this kind of workflow and then stopped recommending it. And then it introduced like the two parallels, the app router and the page router.
They're not parallel, they are substitutes.
They are substitutes, but they are meant to sort of ease your way into. So when you're using the app router, you're building a single page application.
No.
So
the app router is the new one with the middleware designed for server-side rendering.
Yes, but it's a single-page application meant to hydrate stuff that is rendered on the server.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I mean, the client side is a single-page app, right? So you dump down the HTML pre-rendered, and then you tack on the JavaScript, and then the JavaScript is different because the HTML got partially pre-rendered, so it has to hydrate it rather than render it. I know it's weird because it's a backend server doing HTML, and then you have like a different JavaScript run. Like I know that the terminology gets very tacky, which is why I wanted to ask you. But ultimately, Node.js is an Express.js app, and the recommendation is to not use the Express.js for your API.
You said Node.js is an Express.js. You mean Next.js is Express.js?
Isn't that what I said?
You said Node.js is Express.js.
Whatever I said. Whatever I said, that's what I meant.
So you have Next.js, which is a Node run server, right? So this is a server application running on a Node or Dino or something like Node. And
Tony, why are we not deploying to digital?
Because that's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. Today we're discussing what Adrian did on that stream, if it had occurred yesterday. But Adrian had
but it wasn't. Sorry for that.
So we're doing that tomorrow, and today we're talking about it.
We are good in confusing people. No problem, right?
Yeah, great question, Tony. If you just jumped into the stream, we did discuss this at for us local time, it was 16:40. So you'd have to rewind this stream, about 35 minutes, 30 minutes, and we are discussing your question. But the demonstration will be tomorrow by Adrian.
Yes, we will bring an entire app online tomorrow.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have Next.js, which is a Node application, and the point is you can run Next.js. So let's dig how it's meant to be running. Know how it's possible to run.
Yes.
So Next.js is a server only thing, which is meant to be running in Vercel at best, but it could be run on premise as well. So it is meant to run, and there is an Express server inside that. No?
Yes.
So you can have in the page router, it was the /API thing where you put in file inside there, and that was essentially a Express file. So you had this typical Express framework there where you could run an API inside your Next.js thing. These days, especially with React server components, this idea is not that common anymore. So people try to put that server-side logic into the components and have things like server actions. Those are built into React and Next.js idea of how to communicate between client parts and server parts for interaction. So, for example, the server-side components don't have things like side effects.
Yes.
The client-side components have use effect. On the server side,
what you mean. So server-side functions, interactive functions for server-side components that were hydrated, then have to expose an API, and that uses technology that is reminiscent of a REST API, but you're not meant to use it. But you can.
that is the mess because Next.js is already a legacy system and a trendy system at the same time. So it made a lot of transitions from to, and annoyed a lot of people because it started as hey, we have React's client-side rendering, and you can optimize that with SSR. Today it's a little bit like you need to use server-side things and don't give a damn about CSR anymore, which is quite annoying for people who have built CSR-only apps like we have. That was the reason why I actually made this quite successful video where I was actually mentioning, or I made a transition from a 90K log line application to Vite in order to prove that it's possible, but only as long as you are only server-side, client-side rendered. And as soon as you have server-side rendered, you are in this trap of Next.js. Yeah.
I have to be in agreement here with Tony. Yes, you're welcome. I have to be in agreement here with Nick. This whole terminology of server-side rendered and client-side rendered is so stupid and backwards, right? So client-side rendered is dynamically rendered. So my brain goes to client-side is static. No, client-side rendered is JavaScript rendering the HTML on the go dynamically, which is what you're used to with single-page applications. And our traditional way of building web pages from the year 2000 with things like front page and PHP was server-side rendering. Server-side rendering means that the server backend builds the HTML and then serves it to you. So the structure of the document, for example, now this blog, the HTML for the structure was built on the server and then sent to you, transmitted to you over the network, rather than being built on the fly by JavaScript. Yeah. So what we call old school client-side rendering is actually the more modern approach, and server-side rendering is the more classical approach using front-end rendering tools.
Yeah.
Right. So you're using the JavaScript framework that would have dynamically generated it on the front end to build it on the back end instead, and then just send down the dehydrated HTML. So HTML without CSS and JavaScript, and usually like just a document fragment, which is what people think HTMX is, but it's not.
Please not use HTMX.
Please don't use HTML for any kind of production work. It's just use PHP.
We can take the shortcut here. We don't need to talk about that. That's crap. Don't use it.
Yeah, HTML is really crap.
Yeah. So I've put that on screen. The differences SSR, RSC, and CSR. It is a little challenge to actually remember those abbreviations.
Yes. So the difference, I think, I'm glad you put this on the screen. So the difference between server-side rendering and React server components is that server-side rendering is essentially using something like Next.js to build, like, let's say, a JavaScript front-end tool to build all web pages on the backend, cache them as HTML, and then serve the HTML. But the node server that runs Next.js doesn't actually have to be active. There's no interactivity. It just uses a build/compile tool, similar to what you would be using with Gatsby or Hugo, right? So you give it code, GitHub Actions run, it recreates all the HTML, and it deploys the HTML. There's no JavaScript running on the server when a user goes to your website. Whereas with React server components, that is a component defined on the server that builds HTML, but it sends HTML and JavaScript. And the JavaScript hydrates the HTML so that the HTML component, when the user interacts with it, can talk back to the backend server. This allows you to create a component that can invoke functions without you having to manually hook up and wire up the network connections, the fetch API, and things like that, right? So it is a middle, like it is glue. It is hiding away the detail of network communication, similar to what you're used to in tRPC. So React server components sends HTML and JavaScript for a component that is alive and needs to talk back to the build server to give a different version of the same component, for example. Whereas server-side rendering is using front-end libraries to build the HTML on the backend, but the JavaScript server doesn't have to be alive.
Yeah.
Whereas you would typically call either a CDN, a static server, or a backend server if server-side rendering was done without JavaScript front-end libraries, like PHP, for example, or just having like a typical Laravel app, or having some kind of like a Django application or Ruby on Rails. That would be your typical backend app that serves HTML and JavaScript. We don't use the term server-side rendering for that, although traditionally that's what it was.
There was a little bit of a difference to make it more complicated, is that we have SSG, which is not Stargate, which is meant to be static site generation, and server-side rendering. So that is actual rendering. That the generation part happens on the build side. When you actually build your application, that is what Hugo and Gatsby does. And SSR is what Next made so famous. It's that it actually can render a pre-generated site on the runtime for a specific user request and cache that one. And that is what leads to...
So if I come to the website and I'm Denis and I'm logged in, it can generate on the fly, just in time, a HTML bundle for me that has my name on it.
Yeah.
Whereas a static site generator would be sending me back a generic version that doesn't say my name. It would say hello user, hello visitor. And maybe then there would be some JavaScript on top. That's then if I'm logged in, it like replaces my name and puts it on there. But the backend HTML would not be different.
And that is the revolution. It's the RSC, which is I really like the idea. Just don't get me wrong. What I don't like is the current state of it. So it is so new and is only tied to Next.js that I don't recommend it today. But I'm very, very interested in those kind of things for the future, because you actually can have the entire idea of the framework inside the actual library. That's great.
So I don't like React server components for the same reason that I don't like integration testing, because they hide away crucial details and they give you this illusion that you're writing a unit test. With React server components, it creates this illusion that you're dealing with pure functions. But there's a difference between, me having business logic in a pure function, and I can access it, right? Like I sent the JavaScript to the browser and the browser can access it. That's okay. That's pure. That's React, right? Like, so there's a functional core and then an imperative shell. What the developer is writing is the functional core. So to them, it's just declarative pure functions. And the library takes care of the imperative shell. The library takes care of state management with the DOM, with the embedded system, with the browser. Whereas
Yeah,
React server components, it to me, it feels like it maintains this illusion that they are pure functions, but it hides the network side effect. And to me, that is an impure environment.
it is. It is.
And I
It is
think
one
that
of
just
those new
makes
magical environments. Yeah.
yes, and I think that just makes development like it looks simple, like it allows more interactivity for less code written, but I find that like that mental gap, like that illusion, is so difficult to maintain that I think it introduces more drawbacks than benefits. And don't get me wrong, this is not new. I have the same problem with Vercel.
Yeah.
Um, Vercel like gives me the same like so to be clear, Vercel with edge functions. It gives me the same kind of wait, this isn't a pure function. I know this
Mhm.
isn't a pure function. That runs in this when I have to use my finger and say that runs on the server, this runs on the client. I get this like weird disillusioned effect of why are these things bundled
Especially in
together?
a large team, which is one of the serverless
Especially in the large
problems.
team.
It is so hard. Serverless is a magical thing as well. So you give away the complexity of something like Docker,
Hmm.
where, in my opinion, there is not much of complexity, but that's another topic. And you trade it against this magical thing. But
Yeah.
what Vercel and serverless does have in common, it is basically opinionated by their providers. AWS, even DigitalOcean does provides serverless now these days. Most
Hmm.
most platforms does provide you some form of serverless or serverless databases which are highly scalable, and you give away control. And do you really want to give away control? You need to ask yourself, the question for long term, because I don't think that giving away entire control of your application is the best way. This is the reason why I like so much the DigitalOcean app platform, because when I hear already this is one of the points with Northflank, for example, when you take a
Hmm.
look at their website, they promise you something like a one-click deployment for an entire application. First of all, that cannot be. Second, they try to hide away from you the process. But as soon as you get
Yeah.
into an audit, into a pen test, or something like that, you are screwed. You can't do anything about that.
Yeah, because you
And
get feedback and then you don't know how to like tweak the
exactly,
details.
and you basically you are out. You will fail to actually get clients on the larger scale because
Hmm.
you don't have
I mean,
enough.
to be fair, these tools, these cloud providers that are giving you like one-click deploy capability,
Mhm.
one of their main selling points is that they come with, let's say, SOC 2 compatibility out of the gate if you do your due diligence on your side with regards to process to access to the servers.
Yeah, but
Um,
that doesn't count for pen tests, which are standard by the way
yes,
these
that
days.
doesn't count for Pandas when it comes to the code that you wrote.
Sometimes you have that larger clients give you a IT security notice,
Hmm.
severity high or critical, and you need to act. It is like installing Windows patches, installing
Yeah.
newest updates, in setting the SSL settings differently, those kind of things. And as soon as you have platforms which don't let you do anything about that, you have kind of a problem, because then
Hmm.
you get into a legacy state very automatically.
Yeah.
I don't like that personally, and I recommend everyone to think about that twice. Especially now, that's the interesting part. We're coming into the idea of deploying applications and running backends and all those kind of things from the modern front end aspects. So, and there is, I agree with you. You said you don't like the idea of React server components because they're hiding away things. And yes, this is one of the reasons why I'm still using, or we
So
are still using,
I
client side
don't. m-
rendering only.
So I want to be precise here. My problem is not that they're hiding it.
Hmm.
I'm okay with abstracting things away to make them simpler.
Hmm.
Um, what I object to is that the abstraction happened by creating an illusion that isn't correct, right? So the abstraction that they introduced was that this is the same runtime and this is a pure function and this
Hmm.
is a pure process. And that illusion, I find, like the way that they handled it, I think is like, and I have the same problem with TRPC, right? It creates this illusion that this is one runtime, but it doesn't show you where the air gap is between the embedded system and the backend sort of runtimes, the backend runtime and the frontend runtime.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is a problem because they might be running two different versions of JavaScript, and most often they are. One is using whatever the browser is running, one is using whatever Node.js is running.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're using locally to develop the JavaScript could be a third version of JavaScript. And that's where most of the problems happen. That is an extremely difficult to debug issue. And the fact that the barrier between these systems was now hidden from you, you don't know where the air gap is. It, like just like putting breakpoints and debugging such a system is extremely tedious because it's not clear where the where the logic goes, right? Because one breakpoint needs to stop my IDE, the other breakpoint needs to stop something in my browser, and it doesn't work like that. And I find that now there are development tools that inject themselves into the browser, so they give you the debug capability back to the server. But I find that kind of sort of deep incision into the runtime, like these illusions, I think long term create more harm to the developer and their understanding of their underlying system than they solve. Like it reminds me of what things like the Java X Swing framework tried to be and failed miserably. It reminds me of what GWT, Google Web Toolkit, wanted to be. Right, so JavaScript for the browser that you write using Java, and the Java code that you run in your Java runtime gets transpiled into JavaScript, which I think that was the precursor project that then became Angular, but that failed miserably. Like writing it in Java, like hiding where the air gap is, and then the part of the client side, because the client side and server side rendering, these are not new concepts. Google was toying with this idea in 2009. In 2007, and that's what's the GWT toolbox. I remember it had like that red icon. I was there at Google I/O when they announced GWT and Android, and GWT was basically this React server components, but it was in Java, and the client part of the component transpiled from Java to JavaScript, and that was a mess. And Google Wave was built on that technology, which was great. It was one of the rare reactive front-end experiences of the time, like very novel, like like two cursors typing in a document at the same time, which is now anathema and sort of just industry standard for any kind of like Notion, Google Drive, etc., etc. Like GWT, like Google's initial React Server Components equivalent with GWT for Google Wave, that was the flagship product, but it was a mess. It was a mess because of this barrier. And then they removed the barrier and said, well, we don't need the backend stuff. But the front-end stuff is really good. And that became Angular. At least, I'm not sure if it's the same team, because I think Mishko was working on the backend side of GWT, but not on the front-end side, when he then later joined the Angular project, Mishko Hevery. But it does coincide. I'm speculating, but I would say it was no coincidence that Angular very quickly followed from that project once they killed Google Wave. And I think most people here in the audience are too young to remember what Google Wave was.
Yeah, me. I'm young. I'm very young.
Google Wave was this social network that Google tried to push, and it was meant to be this sort of Office 365, essentially. But it came out in 2009, so it was very novel technology, and the whole premise was, well, Google Wave was the prototype for what we now know to be Google Drive and the whole Google suite. Right, so that's this always online, offline capable, multi-user editor environments where you don't have a file and you save it to disk and you edit it and you upload it somewhere, but you edit it live edited live in the browser, and if somebody else is editing it at the same time, you can see their cursor and you can see them editing in real time. That was Google Wave. And that basically requires a technology that is reminiscent of React, because it requires interactive front-end components. Writing all of the JavaScript for that by hand is tedious. You want somebody to be able to say, this is a shape and I want this to style it with CSS. I don't want jQuery to sort of, you can't build something like this with jQuery. And React
Well,
didn't
you
exist back
can,
then.
of course you can, but it is so tedious to build
Yeah.
that in an imperative way. We had the discussion today with internally with the chat application we're building right now, and their chat applications are very complicated to build.
Of course, I built quite a few.
Yeah, there are multiple patterns how you can build it, right?
Yeah.
Any of these become complicated on scale, and one of the aspects was I was mentioning that building that with the old technology stacks we used back then, well, jQuery was one of them, Prototype.js, or our own framework we built in an imperative way. It would be the absolute horror to keep the things in sync. It is like you update, and there are so many functions called. It looks like randomly from you don't know why, and especially the problem is when you get out of the context, you get back to this application a month later, or another developer sits down there, and there is something happening in the browser, and you don't know why. You simply don't know why.
Because you have a socket open, it has a push protocol, you don't know which. All of your functions look synchronous and pure, but they're being invoked at random by TCP packets arriving, which creates this whole asynchronous environment, and then you don't know how they get interrupted, how they
exactly, and
state, in what order they run, how
state
the
is so extremely
managed.
important.
Yeah, how does dirty state look like? How many times can it be updated? Can it override itself? What happens if the packet arrives? And usually for chat applications, for high performance chat applications like audio and like having a voice protocol as an option, you'd build it on top of some kind of UDP channel. So you also had like packets arriving in the wrong order problems and throughput problems, latency jitter, and it is a very complex problem. Very, very complex problem. And
Redux was one of the first things I remember which tried to solve that problem. To actually have a state, so you actually write to the state and others are listening to the state.
Yeah.
But the first implementations were really awkward, let's say.
Very awkward, yeah, because it was object-oriented and very verbose, and the loop wasn't tight. Like you could still run side effects inside the Redux flow, which was the whole problem, right? Like Redux only really works as Remix when you add TypeScript capability to it and you have a linter that says, hey, no side effects. Like you're not allowed to run effects inside the state flow. And then it makes sense, because then you can't recreate. Like you need something that prevents you from accidentally recreating that jQuery horror. And that can only be done with a linter plus some static analysis and rich enough types to identify that, hey, why is this function asynchronous? It shouldn't be.
We have in React the ability to use something like it's called latest. There are hooks like use latest. It is actually a reference to a system pointer, and you can basically pull that one, and you will get the current value of it while you're actually rendering in the React world, right? So you have the React rendering cycles, and you can break out of that like another dimension, but have that in the same flow. And that is what you actually said in the modern world. And I saw code bases. We did that in the beginning as well in the first one, which was crappy.
It's very hacky, and once that gets out of control, it's all
as soon as you don't have a proper linter made up, and you have not your deep dependencies, and you have 500 hooks in your application and side effects with wrong dependencies, and then you to actually get it done somehow, you start to use these hacks to fix your applications, which makes it so important to have a proper React setup in order to work with React properly. Otherwise, it becomes stupid to work with. And these days, we don't use it. There are ways like this typical strict mode Next.js development thing, which is actually quite annoying. When in development, things render twice, while in production, they don't. Then people use these hacks still to actually get to prevent a side effect from running 2 times, because you actually have different functionality then. That is still something very awkwardly implemented by Next.js, in my opinion. But maybe that disappears on some point in time, because that's not nice. That's not natural, right?
Anyway, I do have to jump off,
Yes.
Adrian. This was a very good topic for our viewers. Thank you for being with us. I'm jumping off. Adrian might be staying. Just wanted to introduce myself real quick. I'm Dennis. You might know me as Coach Dennis. You can find me on Crafting Tech Teams, and I help engineers sort of get out of release chaos and fatigue, essentially, if they don't have properly set up development practices. That's what I've been specializing in for the past few years. We'll have a next stream next week on Wednesdays. Adrian and I are streaming every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central European time. And our next stream, I'm just opening up the Notion. There's a stream tomorrow about Adrian setting up the frontend project on DigitalOcean. And there's a stream next week about, well, I don't know what, because that's what you wanted to stream. We have on the schedule for next week. So I guess we can have a React episode for going over LinkedIn news. If nothing else, we can use next week as like a news episode, as a filler episode, to discuss the changes with TypeScript and other continuous delivery news that are happening right now on LinkedIn, or TypeScript and the more recent AI news. I think that would be an interesting discussion point for next.
So when it comes to videos in general, video creation and streaming, I will probably go more into direction of frontend/React and AI coding. I want to take a look into cloud code. I want to take a look into how to actually build more with the AI to actually do that and not talk about that openly. And I want to use more our own application, because I really like that one, because it is grown. It does have its issues, but it's a real application with nearly 100 lines of code, not 100, but 100,000 lines of code now. So it does have enough, let's say, place to actually show things, how they actually work out really well. Multi-service systems, because I still like the idea of microservices, but not micro, but services. And showing AI, React, and those kind of things, and let's say PaaS platforms, is actually what you want to see in videos. So that is what you see quite often, and maybe from time to time in our tech journey as well. But I think our tech journey, especially, is much about we talking and discussing critically about those things. That is, I think, what we have done so far, mostly successfully, and we should continue. So having next week a session where we really talk about ongoing things is actually quite interesting. There is actually a lot of things ongoing.
And the new AI got released today. A new wrapper, Menace AI, got released. It's wrapping Cloud, I believe. It's you might have seen the funny LinkedIn post today.
Which of them?
The one that makes fun of its name. But we can discuss that next week. I think that will be an interesting topic.
Let's do it.
I'm signing off now. Thank you. Bye-bye. And I'll catch you all. Well, I'll catch you all tomorrow for Adrian's stream for DigitalOcean. See you then.
See you then. Bye-bye. So I will do the. I will hop off as well. So we see us tomorrow. Thank you, Dennis. Have a nice one. And next week there will be as well. So as he mentioned right now, but we have another one as well. Maybe interesting for you when I find it, but only then. I have too many content boards. I can't find it. Really? There it is. Refactoring with AI and the job market. That was the idea. Could be quite interesting as well to talk about refactoring with the AI together. So really having these kind of topics with React, with the real application. So if we use Claude 3.5 or something like that, or ChatGPT, how is it actually, how much you can trust it, and talking about the job market maybe a little bit in a longer stream that will be on Tuesday next week, starting from 5 p.m. Central European time, which is I think 10 or 11, I forgot, from Eastern time. So for Eastern time is actually in the very morning. And we're going through those kind of things. Would be happy to see you there. Have a nice day, everyone. I wish you a great one, and see you next time, everyone. Goodbye.